Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Systems for Sanity. I'm your host, Wes Ulmer. I have my guest today, Dr. Omotola. He is the founder of Ajibade Consulting Group, and he's a double board certified adult forensic psychiatrist. He focuses on mental health and advocacy, public education. Sir, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and how you help?
Thank you so much, Wes, for having me. My name is Dr. Omotola Ajibade, Dr. Omotola, Dr. Ajibade, whichever one you prefer. I'm board certified in adult and forensic psychiatry, and for me, most of the time, that means I work in the correctional system as the treating psychiatrist at a number of jails in our local area. And in addition to that, I also run Ajibade Consulting Group, which is a forensic consulting service for issues that intersect between mental health and the law. And so sometimes that involves court evaluations for competency to stand trial, criminal responsibility, and those sorts of things. But we've also done disability evaluations, MEs, and the sky's the limit, really. If there's a legal question and a mental health issue that needs to be sorted out, we're happy to help you think through the case, and if needed, we can also refer out to other people who have handled similar cases.
Excellent. So you have an entire network of people you can refer to if it's not your area.
Yeah, forensics is a small world. It helps to have friends.
Yeah, I can imagine. No, that's good. What got you into this originally? It sounds like a very specific segment within psychiatry. So what got you into adult and forensic?
So we'll start off with psychiatry and then segue into forensics. When I first had any notion of becoming a doctor, psychiatry was not on my radar at all. Like you can tell, some of you might be able to tell by the name, I am Nigerian. And there is the running stereotype about Nigerian doctors, and I am happy to fulfill that stereotype. But I originally wanted to be an ER doc. And fortunately or unfortunately, I didn't match into emergency medicine. And I went through a period of time where I had finished medical school and was trying to find my way. And along that path, I did a number of different like creative projects and things. But a friend that I hadn't spoken to in a long time reached out to me through an unknown number and explained that she was contemplating suicide. And at that point, I had to reassess my career trajectory up to that point, because a lot of people, including this very old curmudgeony Polish social worker when I was on my psych rotation in medical school, had told me that I should have been a psychiatrist. And so when I was the only person she thought she could reach out to, it made me start to reconsider. For anybody who cares to know, that friend is doing very well, running a coffee shop locally, and I'm always happy
Excellent.
anytime I see her because I think back to those days. Forensics was not on my radar at all, even when I started thinking about psychiatry, until the George Floyd protests, really. I thought about it before then, but not committed to it until the George Floyd protests. Because then you start to think about issues related to police violence, and that's currently in our zeitgeist now, for better and for worse, and where you fit into all of that. And
Right.
that whole process of doing all of the soul searching reminded me of a kid named Matthew Ajibade, a young 20-something-year-old Nigerian American kid in Savannah, Georgia, who had a mental health episode and later died in police custody. I remember distinctly that, like, for a period of my life, people were coming up to me, looking at me like they had seen a ghost, because I guess there is a bit of a resemblance there. And then the last name, like, until him, I actually thought I was related to every Ajibade in the country, but turns out that's not the case. So it's not like lost on me that, like, what he needed back then when he had his episode was a psychiatrist. At any point in the chain, he could have used a psychiatrist. And all these years later, I'm doing the job that he needed somebody to do for it. And so that's what got me really to start thinking about forensics and about how our care systems really fail those who have serious mental health issues and happen to brush up against our criminal legal system.
Yeah, it seems like in general we don't pay enough attention to mental health in this country. I would hate to see the statistic because I'm sure it's pretty high. How many bad situations could be avoided if there was more preventative mental health instead of like, oh, so and so freaked out and did X, Y, or Z, and so now let's focus on it now after something bad has already
Yeah,
happened versus getting in front of it. And, I'm very much in the technology space. I'm very much about, if something happens like a computer's not working or a network's not working, I want to dig into it and find out what is the root cause and actually fix that root cause. I don't want band-aids of like, oh, well, it doesn't work and then we just restart it and then it works again. Okay, but why is it not working? Let's get to the bottom of that so we can prevent that from continuing to happen. I feel like if there was more of that in our society, where more attention paid to some of the mental issues and instabilities people have, it could avoid certain tragedies that we see. What
absolutely.
are your thoughts on that?
Like mental health is a convenient scapegoat when something horrible happens and people don't want the uncomfortable truths. And like at its best, a good mental health care system is like a good public health system. It works really well so that you never have to think about it. Because the moment you have to think about it, something is wrong somewhere. And unfortunately, and I do also happen to have a background in public health. Unfortunately, mental health and public health suffer from the same problem, which is that once it starts to work really well, they are enemies of their own success. And so you see this all the time in people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, where you've gotten them stabilized on medications, they're doing really well. And sometimes it's hard to convince them that it's because they're taking their medications regularly
Right.
that they're doing really well. And so they go off of it and then something terrible happens and then we're right back to square one. And so if we built out more proactive systems, which to be fair, legislatively, there have been efforts in the past to do that, but the enforcement of those efforts and the funding for those efforts have been lackluster to say the least.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. I do know. I remember a friend of mine. I can't remember who it was because I haven't talked to her in many years. But my ex-wife had told me that, yeah, so and so would do really well on her medication, and then she would get off of it. That was a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, and then she kind of fall back in the same negative behavioral traits and things like that, not connecting the dots of like, I'm not doing this because I'm on the medication. If I get off the medication, then I fall back in this rut again. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Can you give me an example of maybe a case that you've worked on? No names to protect the innocent, right? But a case that you've
Absolutely.
worked on that you're really proud of. It was a very difficult case. You didn't expect getting as good of results as you did, and maybe share that success with us.
So, one case that in particular sticks out to me was my first job out of training. I was working at a jail in the not the city of Atlanta proper, but in one of the neighboring counties. And I walked past this gentleman and he literally cannot hold up his own spine. Like he's literally bent like this. But he's in one of our emergency chairs that we used to transport people to the hospital. So I was like, okay, whatever. I'm not like, he's in the chair. He's about to go out. I'm not going to worry about it. And then a couple days go by and he comes back to the jail. And then I start to put two and two together that it was the same gentleman from a few days ago, and his condition is really bad. He has what we call catatonia. Catatonia is a very life-threatening psychiatric condition. It's in the popular imagination, it's associated with schizophrenia, but you actually tend to see it more with depression. But in the most common form of catatonia, these people kind of stop moving and stay locked into themselves, essentially. And so, because the local hospital had essentially done the workup and then did nothing and sent him back, I was now stuck having to take care of this gentleman. And so, for the next 2 weeks, I'm very proud of the work that we did in trying to get that man stabilized and keep him from declining further. Eventually, we were able to convince a local hospital to take up his case, and they did. They eventually got him stabilized, and then he got out. About a year later, he comes back to the jail on a failure to appear charge, and I'm so livid because he failed to appear because he was clinically at death's door. And I'm so mad that they brought him back to the jail. And I was ready to raise all kinds of cane throughout the legal system for this man just because of that. But ultimately, he has done pretty well. Even in the times that he has come back, he's no longer catatonic, and he's more engaged. That was one where that was a situation where I felt like both my skills in advocating for the patient as well as just my clinical skills in trying to manage such a complex case in less than ideal environment were really put to the test.
That sounds like a lot. How do you get those people reintegrated into society, or is that even possible?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a framework. I'm not smart enough to have come up with this framework. I think the organization that came up with it is called Policy Research Associates, but the framework is called the sequential intercept model. So it looks at uh, a series of points in the trajectory of someone who faces the legal system, from intercept 0, which is no community involvement. You're out and about in the community living your life, all the way up to the fifth. So from 0 to 5, so 6 intercepts in total, all the way up to the fifth intercept where there's a reentry process. And at every point in the chain, there's an opportunity to intervene and divert people the away from the criminal justice system if possible. And on the back end at intercept 5, if you set them up with appropriate housing, medication, and if they have the mental capacity for it, job training programs, you can actually you would be surprised at who you're able to keep from coming back into the criminal legal system.
Yeah, it seems like if you could work with more people to keep them out of the criminal justice system, it would help lighten the load on the criminal justice system. It seems like
Absolutely.
preventing them from entering that in the first place is the best Band-Aid for the overload in that.
I completely agree. You see when you do this job for long enough that everybody is aware that they do not need to be here. And then sometimes you have very difficult cases where you start to weigh the ethical risks of releasing a person that you know isn't supposed to be here, but you know they have a propensity to decompensate, and their decompensation could end in somebody getting hurt. There was one case that I remember from when I was in training where this woman, she was very psychotic, but she wouldn't take medications or anything and would sleep naked out in the streets of Atlanta. And so at some point it seemed genuinely like the most humane thing you could do for this woman was to keep her incarcerated for as long as you legally could, because otherwise she was out in the street getting sexually assaulted, being exposed to the elements and things like that. At least in the jail she had a regular meal, she had a stable roof over her head, the temperature was controlled, and she was receiving at least whatever medical care she would allow us to give her, you know? And so you run into difficult situations like that as well.
It does sound very difficult. How much of that do you attribute to maybe their childhood and things like that versus maybe genetic versus adult, maybe trauma that they've experienced? What does that look like from your angle?
It is all inclusive. Most cultures have language to describe depression and anxiety. And the fact that most cultures have language to describe that tells you that they're probably among our most ancient of mental illnesses. And on top of that, there are strong genetic components that go along with it. Sometimes environmental factors, substance use, trauma, all of these things go together to create the clinical picture that we see. Like, for instance, in the case of somebody with schizophrenia, and a lot of this data comes out of Scandinavia, because for whatever reason, the Scandinavians love their records. You could you could categorically track that if your mother had the flu when she was pregnant with you, your chances of having schizophrenia go way up. That's like, so like when you think about the multifactorial nature of mental illness, all of these things go together. So there isn't one singular thing. In some cases there might be, but in most cases it's very multifactorial.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Can you think of a case that you've done? Doesn't have to be recent, maybe a while back, but that you wish would have turned out differently? Maybe you gave it your all and you tried to work with the person and you just couldn't quite get it over the hump.
I think it's, for me, it's any time that I know somebody could benefit from mental health treatment and they're categorically refusing it, because I know what's on the other side of some of, especially when you look at it in the context of their charges. I know what's on the other side of that. There was one case a couple of years ago where this gentleman had committed murder just out of the blue. It seems like there was no known history of trauma, substance use, or anything like that. And I would talk to him, like he had this sort of blank stare where you could tell that there was something going on behind his eyes, but he never admitted to having auditory or visual hallucinations. He never expressed any delusional content. So there wasn't enough there to like really diagnose him with a mental health issue. But like if you've been around mental health patients enough, just by looking at him, you knew something was up. And in his case, we tried, because in a situation like that, you can't really force medications on someone who's not violent or aggressive. We did try just offering him medications to see if that would help, and he never took it. So we eventually stopped it. Ultimately, he was found guilty of murder. Um, and objectively, that was a situation where everybody involved was like, if he would have just been more honest with us, the outcome could have been significantly different, both clinically and legally.
Yep. That's unfortunate. Have you ever had like any of the thinking about the gentleman that you were talking to, this kind of blank stare, and have you ever had anybody like threaten you? Like you're there to try to help them, right? Like that's your main goal. Have you ever had somebody come back and like threaten to do harm to you when you're trying to help them or no?
Yeah, but that's rare. It does happen. I'm not going to pretend like it doesn't, but it's incredibly rare. It's like people with mental health issues are far more likely to be victims of violence than to be the perpetrators of violence.
Interesting.
In the time that I've worked in the correctional system, and I've been doing this job probably 2.5, going on 3 years now, I've had direct threats to my life like twice.
Okay. So very minimal
And
then.
that's I've worked at probably 6 different jails now, thousands of patients across multiple counties. The one that for me was actually very scary. The gentleman likely had a shank on him, but he didn't make any overt gestures. He didn't verbally threaten me. He just adopted a very defensive posture, and the person next to me abruptly terminated the interview. And that situation was de-escalated very quickly. Nothing happened. A couple of weeks ago, a gentleman who was floridly psychotic. He was an African American gentleman too, but for whatever reason, he hated all Black people, especially Africans, and wanted us all dead. But that was in the context of his psychosis. Like in the time that we've been giving him treatment, as far as I've been told, his behavior is much improved. He's no longer verbalizing those kinds of threats. But sometimes that loss of touch with reality can especially when it's a paranoid persecutory delusion, can increase the risk of violence. But it's, even in some of the worst jails in the country, it is violence that's directed at you is still relatively rare overall, but it does happen.
Interesting. What since you're knee deep in it every single day, what's one myth that maybe the public has about mental health that causes more harm than good when it's repeated at scale?
I think the myth that mentally ill people are inherently violent is probably the most damaging
Okay.
thing, because and there's a quite a few creators with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder that I follow online, because when you're in my position and you're trying to get through a whole bunch of patients on a regular basis, you're not seeing them as whole people sometimes, and that's unfortunate. One of the beauties of social media is that you get to see some of these people as whole people, and you get to hear sometimes how funny these people are. When they're acutely psychotic, you don't know that. You get to see how genuine, how caring, how loving a lot of these folks are, how much they mean to their family and how much their family means to them. So the idea that people with mental illness, and especially serious mental health issues like bipolar and schizophrenia, the idea that they're inherently violent is perhaps the most damaging myth that I would love to disabuse people of. And once again, with mental health issues, or any kind of mental health issues, are far more likely to be victims of violence than the perpetrators of it.
Interesting. We talked a little bit earlier about how mental health is kind of underserved in this country. What do you think one of the biggest disconnects is between how mental health is discussed publicly and how it actually works clinically?
I think one of the hardest parts is that the mental health system can be at times coercive. And that is different. Like, when you're on the outside looking in, that's difficult to grasp. And part of that is because there's inherently a safety issue, a safety risk for the person and a safety risk for the public if those issues remain unaddressed. And so like, the disconnect publicly is that we only want to talk about mental health, or we only want to blame mental health when something has gone catastrophically wrong. Whereas if we addressed a lot of systemic issues overall, every policy measure that we put in place as a society has either a direct or an indirect effect on people's mental health. If you're depressed and anxious because you can't put food on your table, because you're working like a dog at jobs that don't pay enough for you to live your basic life, that is a policy issue.
Right.
No dose of Zoloft or Prozac or any other medication will solve the fact that despite all your hard work, economically and at a policy level, we have created a system that is unsustainable for you to live, right? And so the more we invest in policies that improve people's lives overall at any measure, both like, if it's housing that people want to tackle, go ahead and tackle that. If you put a roof over people's heads, you instantly decrease a number of health outcomes related to like unnecessary ER visits and things of that nature. Like, all of these things are tied together. When people are exposed to the elements constantly, they're more likely to get injured. They're unlikely to seek appropriate medical care. If you solve the housing issue, you take care of all of that. And especially if you're creating a housing system where they can receive any kind of medical care, whether it's the mental health or the physical care, like at a place that's in close proximity, affordable health care at a place that's
Yep.
in close proximity to where they live, like, you already know where they live because you already provided them housing. Just bring the doctors to them. And now you don't have as many people crowding up the EDs. And so, like, you can save the EDs for like true emergencies. Like, these are things that have been done in a bunch of other places. We're not out here to reinvent the wheel. But at every level, if mental health is of concern to you, pick up a policy issue, fight for it. The more we fight for policy issues that make people's lives better, the better off our mental health will be overall.
Yeah, I agree. There's so much wealth concentrated at the top of our society, and those at the bottom are basically fighting for scraps.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. It's kind of the way the system's built with, there's a lot of greed in companies. I was
Mm,
talking with a gentleman the other day. I said, we were talking about the culture of a company. He was talking about how he owns a massage studio. And he said that his therapist, he tries to treat his therapists like, the goose, because they're the ones who are bringing the clients in the door. So if you lose the therapist because you're not paying them well, you're not treating them well, you put yourself, the business, at a disadvantage because now you lose that therapist and the client's likely to follow that therapist somewhere else. If you treat
Absolutely.
them well and you pay them fairly, then the client stays and the company continues to make money. So you continue to, the goose continues to lay that golden egg. So it's just there's so many companies that don't treat their employees well, and they put them in a bind where they have to choose between, hey, do I pay rent this month or do I eat this week? And it's sad, living in, the United States of America, it's a lot more prevalent than a lot of people think it is, that people are starving every day and struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah,
Just,
I agree.
yeah. And a lot of
From a
that then
business stand,
they lose their home and then they're anxious and suicidal and all that kind of stuff that no amount of Zoloft, like you said, can fix that. But there's
yeah,
things we can do. There's policies we can implement that can fix that. But we have to all want that as a society, unfortunately. And not
yeah.
all of us want that.
Well, from a business standpoint, I think about a quote from I think I read it. It was from Richard Branson years ago. Said like train train your team well enough that they could work anywhere, but treat them well enough that they never want to leave you, or something to that
Yep.
effect. I think like in sort of in sort of a business mindset sort of way, that like I think that's a honestly that's a philosophy that can apply across the board. As a nation, if you give people the resources that help them live fulfilling lives such that they could theoretically live anywhere in the world, but you're also like helping them build a stable life that's like that keeps them fulfilled, like they're going to want to stay in your country. I'm Nigerian. I grew up in Nigeria, but I'm not living in Nigeria right now. And so many Nigerians are like that. Like Nigeria is a country that categorically does not treat its people well. And that's unfortunate. And you see that all across Africa and much of the developing world. For better and for worse, there are a lot of folks who have the ability to do so, leave for better opportunities elsewhere. But if you help build a strong foundation underneath people so that they can go anywhere, but you're also treating them well so that they choose to stick with you, like your outcomes over time get better and better.
Yep. And your society as a whole is more healthy, less mental issues probably, and things like that. I know when my COO, Shane, he and I met by chance. And since he's come on board, he's really helped us get SD Tech really going in the right direction in terms of both our staff and our efficiency and our revenue and everything. It's been incredible. One of the big things that he enjoys about working here is the ability to steer some of our company policies, offering our employees things like unlimited PTO. Of course, you have to have responsible employees because with unlimited PTO, that means it's unlimited. So if you have people that are irresponsible and taking a lot of extra time off when it's not appropriate, then you have a problem. But if you're able to put those kind of policies in place, it's crazy because a lot of companies with unlimited PTO policies see employees take less time off, not more time off. And it
Yeah,
just having that ability to take time off whenever they would want to take time off is powerful. And it breeds a work environment where people want to stay and they want to pull in the same direction and help the company grow, which is what we've seen. And
absolutely.
it's great. And you keep the people that are awesome and you don't keep the people that aren't. It's a privilege to work in a wonderful environment like that and not some company that mistreats you. So you have to, it's a two-way street. It's a two-way street.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
how many, you have your consulting firm, is that how
Yeah.
you interact with all of your patients is through your consulting firm, or is that outside of what you do normally? Like you said, you deal with some of these inmates
So
in prisons. Uh,
the correctional work is outside of the forensic consulting. I try to keep the two
okay.
separate, even though they are linked in terms of the intersection with the legal system. But the consulting work is largely like clinically, I work in the jails, and then the forensic work faces the court side or faces like employers and benefits side because of the like disability and independent medical evaluation stuff. So that's pretty much how the two sort of split.
Okay, interesting. How long have you had the consulting company? Did you start that before you started working with the prisons, or was that after, or what does that look like?
I kind of started it at the same around the same time
Okay.
when I was finishing up my fellowship and starting to think about where I wanted to end up. I knew I wanted to start building a firm. And part of that was just that I'm a serial entrepreneur. Once upon a time, I thought I was going to be a songwriter for Disney. I've had like multiple failed businesses, but with each one, you learn, and then you do better. So
Yes.
like, the confidence that I got to actually feel like I could start building a consulting firm straight out the gate came from a lot of my experiences building a photography business in what I call the purgatory years. So those years between finishing medical school and starting my psychiatry residency is about a 4-year gap where I was just trying any and everything that I could get my hands on, both to like put food on the table and to just continue to advance myself to the next stage of my career. So coming fresh out of fellowship, I knew that I wanted to start building a forensic consulting practice. And then at the same time, I also knew that like I couldn't like to build a forensic consulting practice. One is a lot of hard work. Two, you're not going to get cases right away. And so you really have to have something to hold you down as like your main gig while you're building it. And so in thinking through what my options were, I figured working directly within the correctional system would be the best way to not feel like I'm heading in two separate directions at all times.
Yep, that makes sense. What other companies did you try starting before? Like, what other business ventures did you go into as an effort to kind of get into the entrepreneurial space?
I had a failed t-shirt company. I tried to start my own indie record label at one point. Like growing up, like especially when I was in secondary school in Nigeria, my friends and I in our school magazine would write these like fake articles where we all pretended like we had multi-million-dollar record deals. And some of us, like a couple of us actually became like full-time performing artists. So like clearly all that effort and creativity wasn't lost. It just didn't happen for me. But along the way, the things that I learned about like how to build a business, how to structure what you need in terms of workflow and operations and things like that, all of that was very helpful. And I think the one that's been prior to the forensic stuff, the one that was arguably the most successful is my photography work. And I took the lessons that I learned specifically from the photography business and just applied that straight into how I designed like the how I designed the brand identity for my my forensic consulting work.
It's interesting you're talking about the lessons you learned from the other companies. If you could go back in time and share some tidbits of information about running a company or starting a company, like for example with SD Tech, I've had it for 25 years, learned a lot of painful lessons along the way. One of which is get yourself a really good accountant as early as possible. The longer you wait to get a good CPA, good accountant, the more difficulty you're going to have with maintaining your books and filing taxes and all that kind of stuff. What important lessons did you learn along the way in your business ventures?
Find a good mentor. Find look, if you're able to find somebody who's doing the thing you want to be doing or something similar to what you want to be doing, and it doesn't even have to be the exact same thing, but if they have a mindset that you're looking to cultivate in yourself, that's the person to have. The best lessons I've ever gotten, especially as my photography progressed, came from just casual conversations with people like Matt Odom. He's a legendary commercial photographer. I do like people centric pictures, portraits, weddings, private events, that type of thing. I remember just that, like, one conversation changed my life. It was like, join PPA, go to the Imaging USA conference. That's the big annual PPA conference. And like, when you're there, take 2 business lessons, take 1 creative lesson, like sit
Nice.
in on 2 business courses, 1 creative course. I did that. And then after that, I just walked around. And as you're walking around, you're visiting all the vendors, you're watching more seasoned professionals ask questions. And suddenly, like, just in the process, you just shut up and you listen when those guys are asking questions. You now know the stuff that you should be thinking about that maybe you never considered. I remember, like, in one conversation, I learned so much about like printing technology, because I'd hired printing companies before, but I'd never like looked into it in depth. And just watching this man like pepper questions at the vendor for the printer service taught me so much about like just the technology behind how photographs get printed. So if you find a good mentor, even just one conversation with them will change your life and your business. And if you're able to sustain those relationships, and then you will be forever the better for it.
Yeah, I've also heard about. I watch a lot of Dan Martell. I don't know if you're familiar with Dan Martell.
No, I probably should be, but no, I'm not familiar.
I'll connect with you on LinkedIn and I'll send you a couple of his videos. If you have a
Okay.
thirst for knowledge, this guy he's incredible. I can't remember if he was into drugs as well, but he was definitely an alcoholic when he was younger. And I think he
Hmm.
had substance abuse problems as well. And he ended up working his way out of that and starting a couple different companies. Some of them didn't make it. He made some mistakes along the way. And now he has multiple multi-million dollar a year companies. The guy is just a beast. Super cool guy, does a lot of videos, gives a lot of business advice and things like that. But I think one of the things that he's kind of hammered home in my head is you always want to be leveling up your circle, your sphere of influence, the people that you hang out with, the people that you know. If you're the smartest person in the room all the time, you're probably in the wrong room.
Yeah,
You want to be around people smarter than you, so you're
exactly.
always leveling up your capabilities, your capacity, your mental fortitude, all of that kind of stuff, and then being around other business owners and things like that. That's one of the things I've enjoyed about doing these podcasts is expanding our sphere of influence, the people that we know. A lot of our clients we've had for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. I mean, I know their kids and I've heard the stories. Oh, little Johnny, now he's 10. So you get in these situations where we know our clients very well. And, of course I could interview them and have a podcast with them, but then it's kind of like, okay, tell me the things that I already know about you. And it sounds very scripted and not natural. Getting to meet people and getting to interview people that I don't know very well is a lot more interesting to me. And I love sharing people's experiences with our audience and things like that. And hopefully it brings some value, even if there's little nuggets, like we were talking about, little things that you learn along the way in either
Mhm.
successful or failed business practices. How big do you want to grow your consulting firm to? I mean, is it multiple employees? Is it just you? Do you want to grow
For
it?
right now, it's just me, but
Okay.
and this is part, like Simon Sinek says, begin with the end in mind, you know? So I put group purposely in the name to remind me that like it's not always going to be just me.
That's
And
great.
that's the whole point, because sooner or later you're going to want, like, everybody has to grow.
Yep. I think for the first maybe 12 years or so, it was very, very incremental growth, not a whole lot. It was a real struggle at the beginning when I first started my company and getting this, you've got to go out and you got to find the clients. You got to be good at sales. As an entrepreneur, you have to be good at like everything. You have to be good at
Exactly.
sales until you can hire people at least. Good at sales, you go out and you get the clients. Like, yeah, I got a client. Yeah, I have money coming in now. And then now you have to service that client. It's like, okay, well, now all my time is consumed with servicing the client. Now, how do I go out and find new clients? So you finally get over that hump and you're like, okay, I've freed up my time now. Everything's settled down over here. Let me start focusing on getting the next client. Then you get the next client. You're back in that same situation where you're trying to tamp down all those issues that they're having right out of the gate, get everything under control. So you keep repeating that process. So it's very, very slow. You keep hitting these
Yeah.
plateaus. You're there for a while, then you try to grow again and you're there for a while. I think it was not until like 2014 or so, I partnered with a couple other guys. And even though the partnership didn't ultimately work out, it was beneficial for all of us. It helped push all of us to the next level of our businesses. And then when I ended up pulling out of that partnership and kind of restarting SD Tech, I took all my client base with me, everything I learned from that partnership, and continued to grow up from there. Then Shane came on board and we just really exploded from that point. But it's
Yeah.
interesting.
The hardest part when anybody's on an entrepreneurship journey, you underestimate sometimes how lonely it is in the beginning. You also underestimate how hard it's going to actually be. And perhaps that's by design. I inherently think that there's a little bit of delusion built into being an entrepreneur
Yeah.
because like in mental health we say delusion is a fixed false belief, and that's normally a symptom of like psychosis, but inherently I also think of it as integral to like the human experience, because within a delusion, once people have delusions, they often act in accordance with their delusions. And so like once you've believed that something is true, you will start to act in accordance with it. And so there can that can be an adaptive response, because if you look at an inventor, they're seeing things that don't exist, and then the acting in accordance with it is to build the thing that doesn't exist, right? For you and I, the acting in accordance with our delusion is to like build the business that doesn't exist. And so, and that's gonna feel lonely for a while. But once it's reality tested and it turns out it's true, that you're in a different league.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's one of the reasons we started our franchise company. Is it's very difficult to start any business, but if you at least have vendor relationships in place and systems that can be used and all that kind of stuff, you get a
Hmm.
head start. So
Yeah,
instead of it taking 25 years like it's taken me to get to where I am, if we franchised our concept, somebody who took that information and repeats the successful processes and systems that we've implemented could get here much quicker, like a shortcut,
yeah,
if you will. It's not easy.
exactly.
It's not easy. It's not like, oh, it's going to be a slam dunk deal, but there's a lot of MSPs out there where there's no shortage of managed services companies, but there's only a handful of franchise systems for managed services companies. And there's a reason for that. It's not easy to implement or set up or figure
Exactly.
out. We've got a couple of them. We got two now. So that's kind of to your point before. It's just a pipe dream, right? Until you have those franchisees buy into that system, that's when it becomes a reality. Now you have somebody paying money, believing in your process and procedure and your idea that you presented to them. You too can own this managed services company. They buy into that, and now that makes that franchise concept a reality. So
Exactly.
it's been an interesting journey.
I think as you were talking, it reminded me of the poem "The Road Less Traveled" by Robert Frost. Everybody loves that poem because they think it's a happy-go-lucky story about blazing your own trail. But in reality, he wrote it to mock one of his friends. And the story behind that friend's life is actually kind of sad. But one of the points of the poem is that the friend suffered a lot by taking the road less traveled. And I think inherent to the path of an entrepreneur is going to be a lot of suffering because you are going to take that road less traveled. The gift at the end of it is that you have now blazed a trail for someone else to follow. And to some extent, I don't think Frost's friend understood that, because he then made life choices that didn't turn out well for him. But maybe perhaps that is the reason people have such an optimistic view of the poem. But that process, as you're going through, as you're in the trenches, sometimes all you see is the process. But when people start to buy into the vision, they're seeing it as a finished product, but they don't
Right.
see all the struggle that went into it.
Yeah, they definitely do not. I mean, it probably people looking at me from the outside is like, oh, he just must have it made. He just sits in his office and does podcasts all day. But I'm like juggling estimates and having to run my car over to the dealership to drop it off because it's got another nail in the
Yeah,
tire, and trying to follow up on things that weren't done yesterday by my team and all this kind of stuff. So you're juggling 80 million things as a business owner. Some days I think to myself, man, it'd be a lot easier if I just worked for somebody else. But you do the thing that most other people won't do, is run your own business. And there is a reward. There's a lot of freedom, but there's also a lot of responsibilities.
Yeah, it's like Invictus. Sorry, I used once upon a time. I mean, this probably goes back to the failed songwriter in me. I always think in terms of like poetry. There's a poem, Invictus. I forget who wrote it, but the last line of the poem is, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul."
Yeah, I have heard that somewhere before. I don't remember where it's from, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's business ownership is not for the faint-hearted. There's times where the stress has just been through the roof, and I don't know how, most people would be in the corner of the room in the fetal position, just like make it all go away, right? But it's like you just have to put your head down and just kind of push through it
yeah.
and do things to help you reset. I do cold plunges. I think I mentioned that earlier, but I have a routine throughout the week that I'll go and get a massage on Thursdays. I'll go and do a stretch and then go and do a cold plunge. It's kind of like my trifecta. The cold plunge has been incredibly beneficial in helping me do a reset of my mind. So when I get kind of overwhelmed with everything going on at the same time, forcing myself to get in an uncomfortable situation, that 43-degree water, and sit in there for 10 minutes, having the mind over matter kind of thing, and getting yourself through that and just kind of thinking about life while you're in there and contemplating things really helps with a reset. Have you ever done a cold plunge before?
Not a cold plunge, but secondary school in Nigeria, I took plenty of cold showers.
No.
The trick, like they used to tell us, the trick is you pour the cold water like right at the nape of your neck. And I'm sorry for those of you who like were blessed with seeing my bald spot. Yeah. You plunge, you pour the cold water right at the nape of your neck, and it'll immediately send a shiver down your spine so that you can like get through it.
Yep.
Like for me, the closest thing I have in my life to cold plunges is the doing the wedding and the portrait photography, because that allows me the opportunity to think about moments in life that people actually want to remember, you know? Because in my clinical work, nobody's coming to see the psychiatrist because they're having a good day. That's not how life works.
Right.
You go to your primary care doctor just to do your annual physical, get a quick once over, just to make sure everything's working right. People don't do that for their mental health. They should, but they don't, right? And so most of the time, people are coming to me because of issues they're trying to move away from, moments in their life that they want to stay in or revisit over time. And so the process of doing portrait work and doing weddings reminds me that even through it all, there is still like joy to be had in life. There are still things worth remembering.
Pictures are powerful, especially from special events. You said you do weddings and what else?
I do weddings, I do portraits, I've done birthdays, but like the process of like sitting with someone and getting their portrait made, there's a documentary aspect to it, in that taking this person's photograph means this person existed. But there's also often an aspirational aspect to it as well, because if you're taking the time to sit for a portrait, you're wanting to remember probably a version of yourself that may not exist in a couple of years. And so I always recommend that everybody take lots of pictures. One day you're going to look back and feel differently about that time in your life. You're going to remember what you rose from, especially if you do take those pictures at rough times in your life. Because I've looked back at some of my old pictures from, I call it the purgatory years, that space in between med school and residency. And I didn't realize how depressed I was back then until I saw those pictures. But to look back on them now and to see where I am now, like I don't wish that experience on anybody, but I'm incredibly grateful to have gone through those experiences. I think they made me a much better psychiatrist overall.
Yeah, I think they say that the best entrepreneurs are people who had to go through hard times. Somebody who just gets spoon-fed everything their entire life probably doesn't make a good entrepreneur because they haven't gone through suffering. They haven't
Or a
had
good
to.
psychiatrist.
Yeah.
You gotta suffer through something sometimes.
Yep. I bet. As we kind of get towards the end of the podcast, I wanted to kind of touch a little bit on technology and your thoughts on automation and AI. What technologies do you use both in your private consulting practice and in your general day to day with the prison system? And are there any automations, or if you could wave a magic wand, like what would you make technology do that would really help your day to day operations?
Day-to-day operations from the consulting side, I like Zoom a lot. One, like you think about the network effect, like virtually everybody has Zoom, but it does have some pretty robust tools, and Zoom isn't paying me to say this. I wish they would, but they're not.
Right.
But like a lot of their AI tools, I think, have been pretty helpful from like an administrative perspective, where like you're having a meeting and it's auto transcribing, like it has a transcript readout of the meeting, and it also has like an AI note taker as well. And all of those, because of the nature of the work there, I set it up so that it only gets sent to me, but it helps jog my memory about certain things. EMRs come and go. There's no perfect EMR system. The thing that I wish existed is probably a good like automated risk assessment tool. The problem with the problem with some of the data that's used to create risk assessment software is that a lot of it is based on historical data, which is already prone to bias in terms of like race and gender and socioeconomic status and things like that. And so so instead of actually helping people, it can perpetuate harms. So for right now, the place where I see AI being the most useful is in relieving certain administrative burdens. I worry about issues of like sycophancy and stuff, because I have seen cases of AI psychosis that ended up in the jail, and then often enough on the news you read about the person who is interacting excessively with AI, and the AI convinced them to either harm themselves or especially to harm themselves, but occasionally maybe to harm another person as well. And I think those are issues that probably need to be worked on a little bit more before they're ready for prime time. But from an admin perspective, where AI is at right now is decent. It's not perfect,
Right.
and it can only get better from here.
Yeah, I'm interested to see. I was watching a video the other day. This gentleman was talking about some different automations you can do for businesses, just kind of giving me some brainstorm ideas. And one of the things he touched on was contract reviews for attorneys. And so
Yeah.
you have to really train the AI on like, hey, this good, this bad kind of thing. So it can then make judgment calls on paragraphs that it sees and information that it catches in these contracts when it's reviewing them. I'm wondering if you fed it uh, clinical data, if you could train it, obviously train it to your preferences based on your clinical data. Is that something that you think it could do if you had the information fed into it?
It would be a lot easier to do that if it wasn't the correctional system. Their level of regulatory and legislative hurdles
Right.
to do that for a correctional population is astronomical. And you'll see that most of the companies that are working in the mental health space with AI and automation tools are working towards like use cases aimed at the general public. And that's probably where you're going to see the most traction for it. Like when I'm on LinkedIn, I see requests for like medical and psychiatric experts all the time to help train AI models to like basically to do exactly what you're saying, this good, this bad, to advise the team on what they should be prioritizing and things like that.
Right.
I think we have a long way to go. Like probably AI note taking for like clinical notes is decent now and could probably stand to be a little bit better, but it's manageable. But to actually use it as a clinical decision making tool, I'm not ready to buy that hype personally.
Could you use it in your private practice if you fed it your own clinical information, or would there be a lot of regulatory hoops to jump through on that?
There's a lot of like privacy concerns. One of the things you think about is who owns the data. Every time you feed an AI system information, that information that you have fed the AI now becomes part of the training set for the
Right.
future. And so like unfortunately, like you want to be protective of people's information. And so the organizations that don't have anything about HIPAA built into like the legal framework of how they operate are probably not going to be the best organizations to work with in terms of doing that kind of work. But I do think that there is an opportunity, especially if there's enough de-identified data, to start to do some of that work, provided that everybody has appropriately consented to it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think you'd have to figure out a way to redact names and things like that. I'm thinking in terms of similar to Copilot, like the way Copilot's set up in
Mm-hmm.
M365 silos the data that you train it with to the tenant. So like the company that owns the Microsoft tenant that Copilot instance exists in, that data, that's why you want to use something.
So you're thinking something closer to like a local AI, sort of like what NVIDIA did, I guess, a couple of years back.
Yeah, similar to that. Like when you purchase Copilot from Microsoft, it keeps any data you feed into it local to your tenant itself. So in the Microsoft cloud, like you have all your email information, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like if you had a Microsoft email account with M365, you couldn't get access to that because it's in your tenant. It's siloed into your tenant. Same kind of thing with the data you feed into Copilot. So it's almost like your own instance of ChatGPT inside your tenant. So that keeps the data privacy, such as, if you're a contractor or something and you're feeding in plans or client information, some other contractor is not going to have access to that information. If you're a doctor
Yeah.
and you're storing your data on the Microsoft cloud in your tenant, some other doctor is not going to have access to it. It's not just like out for public view. So that's kind of how the Copilot works in the Microsoft tenants, is it silos the information. So it'd be the same kind of concept, is you would have a base system that then you would train it with your clinical data so it goes to your preferences, and that data doesn't carry over to anybody else's preferences or instance of that clinical AI, if that makes sense.
I think I know of a couple of forensic psychiatrists that are just nerdy enough that they're experimenting with that exact thing. Because the conversations, like I'm very much a generalist, and the level of conversation that I've seen uh these particular folks have about AI, especially from like a technical and programming perspective, is way above my knowledge base. But there are people that are tinkering with like local instances of
Mm-hmm.
AIs that are siloed off from the rest of the ecosystem. But my impression is that they're partly doing it for fun, just to see what works and what doesn't. They're using it for their own like internal workflows and not really trying to build a product that is going to go out into the world as this is a thing that you can use and would be for the industry. It's probably a little too early for them to be able to create something like that, but it is something that's being researched on just by a couple of like AI nerds who, at least in my field, are also
Yeah.
forensic psychiatrists.
We're big on trying to find ways to implement AI in our space, specifically to reduce workload on our techs. We're big believers in not eliminating jobs, but augmenting tools that our techs are already using to help them do their job better, help them do their job easier. One way to do that would be to, we're working on implementing an AI receptionist. Somebody calls in and say, hey, this is the problem I'm having. And it can go through some basic troubleshooting. It can interact with our RMM, which is the tool that we
Hmm.
use to access clients' computers remotely. And it can do basic things like run scripts that we've already created or reboot computers. And the funny thing is, 9 times out of 10, that will fix it. And that would avoid a 15 to 30-minute conversation with one of our techs. So if we have 10 locations calling in at once and it's as simple as rebooting computers, you'd think the client would think to do that first, but a lot of times they don't. So they just, oh, it's
Yeah.
not working. And they call us. We're like, oh, let me remote in. Oh, yeah, it looks like your computer hasn't been restarted in, 45 or 90 days. It's like time to restart, let the updates apply, things like that. Then all of a sudden it's working again. So
Yeah.
letting the AI talk with them, do that. And if it doesn't work, a couple little simple restarts and a few things like that, then it says, hey, this is not working. Let me get you with one of our human techs. They can kind of take it from there and then do a handoff. So that initial triage and the note taking and the ticket and all that stuff is already captured for the tech, and the tech can kind of take it from there. It saves them, 15 to 30 minutes right there.
Yeah, we're like from a forensic evaluation standpoint, where that could be most helpful is in like data abstraction. Because for some cases, you get thousands of pages of records. And really, for some of these psychiatrists who are tinkering with AI, they're tinkering with it mainly to help expedite or augment the process of data abstraction. And especially and that's like if you're going through several thousand pages of documents, especially just like pages of like EMR records,
Mm-hmm.
photographs. Sometimes these include like police reports, photographs of the crime scene, video footage, audio footage, all of those types of things. Like that process can be pretty daunting, and it's like going through those records and then synthesizing it in a way that makes sense
Right.
is probably the hardest part of the forensic evaluation and report writing process. If there does turn out to be a well thought out and locked down way to do that data abstraction without compromising very sensitive records, then my God, you would change the lives of the legal system overnight, because it would be applied easily to stuff that lawyers are doing, to stuff that forensic psychiatrists are doing, and to like just a whole litany of things.
It shows a way to do it. Love brainstorming and thinking of ways to improve and optimize workflows and things like that. That's one of my favorite things to do. It's like, oh, this normally takes us, 6 or 8 hours to do. And okay, let's figure out a way to shorten that into, 1 hour or 30 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I've done for the podcast is I've trained one of my projects within ChatGPT to pull background information on podcast guests so I can have that document kind of prepped. And I've trained it, okay, generate a Word doc for me, give me high level what this person's done, some key points to bring up during the conversation, a couple good questions to ask, things like that. I'll let the conversation flow naturally, but if there's a need to steer it in a certain direction, I have a couple questions to go off of and some of their background information. It's very, very helpful. I've enjoyed having
Yeah,
that.
like that's a perfect use case for AI.
Yeah.
Does it compromise anybody?
Yeah.
Unlike the AIs that tell people to kill themselves. I don't love those.
Yeah. No, for sure.
That
Well, do you have any closing thoughts as we come to the end of our podcast?
use AI to help augment the things in your life that are routine and sometimes repetitive.
Yes.
Do not use it as your therapist, at least not yet. But that seems to be the way that a lot of people are going. And then if you're an entrepreneur, good luck to you. Sometimes the first thing you do doesn't work out, but something from it will help you in the next project.
For sure. So if our audience wants to get a hold of you to reach out, what's the best way for them to connect with you? Is it LinkedIn? Is it your website, email, phone?
Yeah, I'm very findable online. You can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Omotola Ajibade, Ajibade. I'm also on social media as Doctor of Minds, all one word. So on Threads and Instagram, especially, um, and those would be easy ways to find me.
Okay. Awesome. And I'll definitely include your LinkedIn when we post this podcast so everyone has access to it. So I really enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you for taking time out of your day and look forward to future conversations.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. You have a wonderful rest of your week.